How's it going there, folks? So I'm here with my pal Stephen Potter again, and he dropped some serious truth bombs here about everything that's not everything, but things that are going on with COVID and Bill Gates, vaccines, and child trafficking, all that stuff. So here you go. Here's some red pill medicine for your ass. So, as far as right now in COVID, and let's call it the vaccinations and Bill Gates. What do you see happening around all that, or just in general in the
Oh
near
man, that
future
whole thing
around
makes my
COVID?
head hurt. So, the Bill Gates Foundation has been working on, and this is totally in the world of conspiracy theory too. The Bill Gates Foundation, here's what people need to do. They need to take stuff as itself. Even if, because if you look at the track record of the Bill Gates Foundation, they have gone out of their way to figure out how to solve. And it's all inside of eugenics too, by the way. It's just a different cut at it. So when the eugenics movement in the 1920s, how it started was they were trying to solve the issue of major drought. So it wasn't originally about controlling the world. It was originally about how do we start to use science to make sure that we can stop having major drought and stop having major crop loss. So the Dust Bowl era and the millions of lives that were impacted out of that came because they had overtilled a bunch of topsoil, and so the Midwest was growing the food for most of the world. And after World War One and all of the devastation of Europe and them being able to grow food, there was just massive famines. And so what they were looking at was how do they manipulate the genetics of the seeds for the plants such that it can withstand drought, can withstand insects. They didn't have chemicals yet. It was like, how do we not starve, and how do we make sure that we can continue to grow grain? Because Johnson and Johnson grew grain and General Mills grew grain, and that's what they did. And so to not go out of business, number one, and number two, to start to try to save the population from starvation, they were looking at how do we grow these seeds such that we can actually do that. So they started tinkering with stuff. Same thing with cattle. So everything that is Monsanto now came out of the eugenics line of thinking then, but it wasn't diabolical at first. It wasn't meant for that. It was literally like, how do we save a starving country? So I have a 1920s poster that says, it's Johnson & Johnson, General Mills. It says, what can eugenics do for our food? And it really was the question. How do we use this? How do we use genetics to solve so many of these problems? So they dealt with that with sick cattle. They dealt with that with goats and chickens and everything else. They started looking at, okay, if we breed these particular steers with these particular cows, then they're going to produce this particular kind of meat. And those are hardier than other kinds of cows. And so if we stop breeding these kinds of cows and we only breed these kinds of cows, then we've got better meat, less fat, higher revenue, blah, 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 right? So that was the whole point to begin with. Then they
Mm-hmm.
realized that you could also do that with people. And that was when
Yep.
things started altering. And then we started messing with the genetics of it so badly that our food doesn't even remotely look like food on a cellular level anymore, because we actually did, in fact, figure out how to grow grain that could withstand the elements of nature. So what do you think your stomach acid's going to do? So we accomplished it, but at a cost. Because every time you solve a problem, it creates another problem. So the
Yep.
same thing with the Bill Gates Foundation. They have stored original seeds, as far as I understand, from most of the food on the planet, so that if anything happens, we actually have a full seed library and can start over. I don't know that that was diabolical in nature and designed to make sure that people starve long enough for us to start over. I don't know about that. I don't know if it was a fail-safe or not, but that's what it seems to me to be. And every time we solve a problem, we create new ones. Now, do I think that Gates was hooked with Epstein, and do I think that all of the pedophile rings and all that other noise? I don't know. There's so much crushed stuff together. Pulling it apart is almost impossible. We're not going to know until these guys are dead, unfortunately. because that's usually when the truth comes out. So I don't
Yeah.
know. But what I do know is that polio was a very real thing, and that vaccinations have solved. I'm not a vaxxer. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm just talking statistically. Vaccinations have solved many, once they were perfected and once they were shown to work, have worked. The problem is that we're talking about a vaccination that we do not have the luxury of ensuring works before we put it out. So penicillin was done from mold, and it has saved millions of people's lives, millions. So we can argue it 70 different ways, much less 2 ways. But what I do know is that it takes at least 2 years to barely get through the trials, and we're not going to know what the far-reaching implications are. Even if you take out the conspiracy theory of it, like, we're now going to sterilize people through the vaccinations. They've been talking about that stuff for forever. And if you want to argue it, you can. The original cough medicine had cocaine in it. It was methadone, cocaine, some green dye, basically, and some methanol. Because it did, in fact, the cocaine plant was used by the people in Latin America to work on their respiratory system. They used to eat it. They still do. So then they were like, oh, well, and they didn't know the implications of coke. They didn't know that 1 trillion people were going to get hooked on it. It was like, oh, well, 1 + 1 = 2. So if we put it in liquid form and you drink it and then your stuff goes numb and then you feel really good, that's called cough syrup. And it worked. And there was some other stuff that happened as a result of that. So, medicine has never been an exact science. It's always been experimental. It's always had side effects. And have we used it to harm other people so that weren't like us? Absolutely. They have sterilized more African American females and more Hispanic females across the board, as well as Irish women, as well as. But when you keep it in the context of you're not me, then anything that's done to you isn't personal. And I don't have to be responsible for it, and I don't have to deal with it as if you're not a human being. So, I've heard all the theories. I've watched all the videos. I've had friends of mine that I consider to be experts in their own fields that I've been a little alarmed at some of the things that they're starting to buy into right now. But most of that is because we're not dealing with the circumstances as themselves. So there have been child rings, and they weren't even called child brides until recently. It's just a way of life for many places in the world still. And if you're in South Asia or if you're in Eastern Asia, in a lot of the poorest places of the country, selling your daughter, if you can't feed her, is the better alternative in many people's opinion. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm not saying that I like that. I'm just saying that's what's so right now. So we've had more people in sex slavery now than we did if you take the whole colonial era put together. So that is a very real issue. And people who have the time, effort, and ability to chase their own diabolical nature to the bitter end, because shooting heroin in your eye socket isn't enough anymore, then you will hit a level of sexual depravity that would curl your blood. And it's been going on. There's been sex cults for 10,000 years. This is not a new thing. So the thing about it is just because we recognize the name of a couple of people, maybe now we have an opinion about it. But this has been going on for forever. So why do we care about that now either, is my question.
Well, with COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown, where people are being exposed to this information, and then their celebrity friends are being exposed as this, I think.
Yeah, but think about it. If we didn't know any of their names and they were just, it was like John Jr. and John Heimerschmidt screwed a bunch of 6-year-olds, we would go, wow, that's terrible, and move on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess it's the illusion of these actors or whoever, politicians, are the illusion is being shattered, and their good person
What illusion?
nature.
We've known that people have been abusing power since power was invented. See, that's the thing that people aren't being straight about. What people aren't being straight about is they know this stuff is happening and they haven't done anything about it, and they're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
So unless people are actually going to put together a coalition and get involved with the FBI cracking the code around all of the stuff that's happening, and unless they're going to go into civil service, and unless they're going to become child defense attorneys, and unless they're going to go into social services, I don't care what you think.
Yeah.
And that's what people aren't confronting. You don't need to know if you're not going to do anything about it. Because then it just turns into another thing of Hollywood Squares. Okay, great. So now we're going to use these kids as our own amusement, because that's what it is entertainment.
Mm.
So we either get off our ass and do something about it, or shut up.
Yeah, but people aren't going to do that. They're just going to keep bitching and complaining and
they will.
Commenting on Facebook.
Okay, they can do that. But you and I have the say about how we deal with it.
Yeah.
See, it takes a small group of people with enough balls to say, I want to know why you want to know that. Are you going to go do something about it?
No, I guess I just see.
I don't mean you.
Knowing the information. Yeah, I was kind of confused if you're.
Who cares? You're not going to do anything about it. Who cares? Here, I'm going to tell you the truth. Here's the truth. There are a bunch of rich people who are bored and can get away with murder literally. Does that help?
No.
There are a bunch of poor people who are bored and can get away with murder. Does that help?
Nope.
You got cartels in the backwoods of Mexico that can cut up people's bodies and do on a regular basis. We're not doing boo-hoo about that.
Yeah.
So does that help anything?
No.
So this doesn't answer any of the questions because I don't have any answers. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of historical evidence of the Rothschilds absolutely did not fund World War II on both sides, except for that the Nazis took over a whole bunch of their operations in Austria. So they used their money. So that's absolutely the only factual way that you could say that the Rothschilds funded it on both sides. Rockefeller, on the other hand, absolutely funded it on both sides because he was absolutely fundamental inside of the eugenics movement. There, now you know.
So, there you have it. More to come with him. Hope it wasn't too heavy. It's what's been going on and how we can deal with it or not deal with it. So, that's it, folks. Take care of yourselves. Love you all. More to come. Peace.